Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder, CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with Mike Simmons, co-founder of Catalyst Sale. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I'm a little excited about this episode because Mike and I were having a brief conversation off air, hadn't turned on the mics yet. And he told a story that I thought, oh my goodness, we've got to share that. And it actually inspired this episode we're going to do just because of this story. So Mike told us a story that led to him getting all wet. And I think you're going to enjoy it. Mike, tell us what happened.
Yeah, not only wet behind the ears, but literally all wet. And, I don't know if this is an indicator for me or what. It seems like a trend, but whenever I go up to the northern part of Arizona, so we were in Sedona this past weekend, and but whenever I go up north, we seem to get into trouble. We shared the story early on in the podcast journey about me getting the Jeep stuck in the snow, which is just absolutely ridiculous, and the number of lessons learned from that. Maybe we'll incorporate that here. And that was in Prescott. Then we're out in Sedona, and I'm usually pretty good at being prepared. Well, I think your park rangers and the Boy Scouts would be happy with me. Always be prepared. And we were in an area where we're going to go ahead and cross a river in and around the Sedona area. And I've got both the phones in my backpack. And in my Jeep, I've got Ziploc bags just for this kind of thing. And I thought, there's no way anything's going to get wet. I'm not going swimming. And I know we're going to cross the river, but everything's going to be fine. Anyway, one thing leads to another. I did not put the phones in a Ziploc bag. And as I'm crossing this very, very short, easy river crossing, I slipped and fell on my rear end and went right in the water, not a waterproof bag, and got everything drenched. So lack of planning put me in a situation where I almost ruined 2 phones. But then it gets worse. The phones are dry. Everything's good. I've got them turned off. And I went and we're out there just hiking around for about an hour. Kids are in the swimming hole and you hear the thunder roll in. And we don't get a significant amount of rain in Arizona. But when the thunder rolled in, I thought, okay, here we've got a little bit of a storm. And thinking of this again, in other words, it's going to pass. So I wrapped the phones up in one of the towels that I had. Well, we get a torrential downpour and more rain than I've seen at one time since I've lived in Arizona, which is about 20 some odd years. But it was like a Florida rain where just sheets of water were coming down. Needless to say, everything was drenched. The entire backpack was waterlogged. The towels were waterlogged. Fortunately, with a little bit of rice and drying some things off, the phones ended up surviving. But I learned a very important lesson. It's important not only to have things, the tools that you want inside your tool chest, like the Ziploc bags and the Jeep, ready for that kind of scenario, but you actually have to use them.
Yeah, I guess preparation doesn't matter if you don't follow through, does it?
It does not. And it makes me think about checklists. Like think about your pre-call plan. So you've got all these checklists, you go through each of these things and then you forget about it when you're going through the actual action. And then you got to ask yourself, well, why did I do those activities? How come I fell short in the execution? So sharing the Jeep story, same kind of thing. I should have aired down when we were going in the snow along this Jeep trail in the middle of the winter. And instead of airing down, left the tires completely inflated, lost traction, found myself in a ditch and couldn't get out. So I ended up having to use the winch. Now, that story was significantly shorter than the entire ordeal. I think the ordeal lasted probably 35, 40 minutes, but felt like 6 hours. And again, you got to use the tools that are at your disposal. What's the phrase, the 7 Ps? Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
Yes. And I do think also when you're prepared, when you have checklists, it keeps you from taking shortcuts too. If you know this is exactly what I've got to do because you've worked through a scenario in your head, you're less likely to take a shortcut or do something like not airing down your tires when it's on the checklist. There's a reason. If you prepare right, there's a reason to do all the things you do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, think about the mistakes that happened just because you didn't check that one thing, and how you could have prevented them by either working through the mental checklist or thinking through the scenarios. Like one question I like to ask in most scenarios, and I try to remember this, but as I'm coming across things like going through an intersection, what's the worst that could happen? One is I'm driving through and someone runs a red light from the left-hand side and smashes into the driver's side of the vehicle. So it's a good practice to always look left before you go through that intersection, or definitely before you go from a red light to a green light and start to drive through that intersection. These triggers are things that sometimes we think about consciously, sometimes it just happened unconsciously, but that's one of the benefits of putting together a plan and then revisiting that plan.
I used to be a park ranger. We've mentioned that, but I knew I worked with a ranger one time she was fabulous. A lot of fun, but she had, you're either going to view this as a good thing or a quirky thing. I don't know which way you'll go, Mike, but she had nearly anything you could think might happen. She had something to deal with it in her pockets. So park rangers, we have lots of pockets, cargo pants, shirts, packs, all of that. We have places to put a lot of stuff. And she went so far as to carry Pepto-Bismol in case she was out on a trail and had that unfortunate situation. She was prepared for it. Now, never in my 8 years of being a park ranger did I even carry something like that in my truck, and she would carry it in her pocket. So what's your view on that, Mike? Is that taking it too far, or is it better to be prepared for everything?
Well, I know if I had my choice of rangers to be close to, it'd be your friend.
Yeah.
As much as I trust you, Jody, it sounds like she's prepared.
She was prepared. She was prepared for anything. I don't, if you had a headache, a cut finger, anything, or a bellyache, she was going to take care of you.
That's awesome. But one of the things I do whenever I travel, I always travel with Neosporin. Just, you never know. I mean, you could get a cut. You don't want things to get infected. I always have a small tube of Neosporin with me. I also always have some, I forget what they call it now. It's like kinesiology tape. It's the stuff you see volleyball players in the Olympics have on their shoulder and whatnot. I've got some of that in strips that are in a bag. So I've got a go bag, a piece, something that that always is with me, that has those things that can fly on an airplane. So I've got quick access to them if I ever need them. Now, do I need them every time? Absolutely not. Where things get really funny though is like if you get into, I'll tell you another Jeep story. So this is going to be the Jeep story, bunch of Jeep stories. But I was out off-roading with a friend and his kids, and for whatever reason, I was having some problems with the Jeep starting. And it was, in Arizona with all the heat, you end up going through a battery usually about once every 12 to 18 months. They just dry out. They can't handle the desert. I didn't put two and two together. I get in the Jeep, take him out off-road, and got his two kids. It's hot out. And fortunately, we get out on the trail and we make it back. The following morning, I go to turn the Jeep on. Jeep doesn't start. So I was within a couple of hours of being in a situation where if I would have turned the Jeep off while we were on the trail, we could have been stuck out in the middle of the desert. So you go through all the doom and gloom. Here's the worst part. I had an external battery charger, one of those, again, just keep it in the Jeep just in case that kind of a scenario happens. When I went to check it, it wasn't charged. So even though we would have had the tool wasn't ready for us to use. So, I'm sure we'll get into how you apply this in sales and you apply this in your role. But it's one thing to have the checklist. It's one thing to have all the tools. It's another thing to go back and revisit those and make sure that you've got the right tools and the right things for the right place so that they're ready to be used when you actually need them at that point in time. And, getting a guy from the UK and a couple of his kids who had just recently moved out here stuck in the middle of the desert when it's 115 out would not have made for a good day.
No, I'm noticing a lot of your stories about both preparation and peril come from you in a Jeep.
I think it's just because I enjoy being in the Jeep so much.
Yes. Well, let's talk a little more about this on how anticipation is a part of preparation, that you can't prepare for something unless you have anticipated that it's happened. Now, there is another side, and we can talk about that too, but reflection is a way that you can prepare. If something has happened to you before, you can now make a checklist or carry the right equipment, whatever, to overcome that if that happens again. But you can avoid some of those by anticipation. So talk a little bit about how you can anticipate and avoid some of situations, bad things that could happen by preparing for something that hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah. And, I know for those of you out here who have listened to the podcast for the 100 some odd episodes that we've put out there, and you've been with us along this journey, you know that our playbook is not very deep. We talk a lot about the fundamentals. And what's amazing is how many of us miss on those fundamentals or miss on those foundational skills. And one of the foundational skills that we talk about is asking effective questions. One of the effective questions that I try to ask in any of these scenarios or any situation that we're going into is that one that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is like, what's the worst that could happen? So let's say that I'm getting ready to deliver a presentation to one of my larger deals for the year. I've got everybody who's supposed to be in the room, and I've got my champion there. I've got the people that he or she are trying to influence. I've got the decision maker. I've got that person's boss in the room. I've got somebody from purchasing in the room. And let's just say that I'm delivering the presentation on site. And all of a sudden, I can't get to the internet. I can't get my network connection going. What do? Well, ideally, I've got a set of PowerPoint slides or Keynote slides that have screenshots of all of the information I planned on presenting or planned on showing. And a lot of people might say that's overkill, but when you've been in that situation before, you realize it's not overkill. It's just smart. It's just good practice. Let's say you're in a virtual environment and you're running into the same kind of thing, and you get a message out you've got a group of people who are getting ready to participate in a virtual session. Have those same screenshots, have that same information so that you can share it with the audience in case, for whatever reason, your network connection goes down and they can share on their side or you're not able to get into their system. So ask those questions and try to work through the individual scenarios. I mean, in a company that I was at before, it doesn't really align with this directly, but I'm going to try to create an indirect story that'll pull it back. We used to have these crush workshops, and it was about crushing the competition. So you'd go through these individual scenarios to figure out how our competitors would try to crush this organization or beat this organization in a competitive environment. And that exercise, those questions that would come up, and maybe we'll get into more detail about this in a future podcast, but those questions that would come up and the detail that would come out of that put us in a better position to compete with our competitors and anticipate the moves that they would make with their customers or with their prospects or with customers that they were trying to take away from us or prospects that we were trying to take away from them. So work through those scenarios, ask those questions, and use that as a way to anticipate.
Also, in a situation like that, when you're in a room with somebody, you gave some great examples of how you can prepare if a problem arises, but you can also prepare for questions you might get. I think if, as you walk through a presentation, you can say, okay, maybe they're going to ask about this. Maybe they're going to ask about that. You can even, your thing where you said, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can even say, what's the worst question someone could ask right here? And I think that helps you prepare answers. So you can take this process you've talked about to prepare and use it, and not just for situations, but to have answers ready, conversations ready, understand your thoughts before someone asks you about something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we talked about it before about like doing the reps. That's how you get the experience. You can't put yourself in every situation. You're not going to have that physical experience of all of these situations. And with augmented reality, there's some really cool things that are coming down the pike that'll allow you to put yourself in a scenario where it might be too dangerous for you to put yourself in that same scenario, or it might be too costly to put yourself in that same scenario. But mentally, what Jody's talking about, you can put yourself in an environment where you have to address a question that you might not have anticipated, or address prepare yourself for an objection, as most of us in the sales role have seen. And we talk about objection handling. prepare yourself for that objection that you know is going to come. And in some cases, you actually want to use your questions to surface that objection. And as you start to, like, if I'm trying to anticipate where a customer should be going or prospect should be going in their decision-making process and they're not getting there, there are some questions I can ask that can help guide them down that path and shed some light in a direction or an area that I'd like them to start taking their focus. So yeah, you gotta go through those scenarios. You've got to plan, you've got to prepare, and know that you will never be prepared for every scenario. But if you don't take the time to start doing some of this prep work up front, you're going to increase the risk that you're going to come across a scenario that you're not ready for.
Okay, speaking of scenarios you're not ready for, that same park ranger who was prepared for everything once got into a scenario she could do nothing about. She, in the parks world, I know you recreate outdoors, so you've probably come across outhouses that are concrete.
I have, but there are also some people who are laughing about us recreating outdoors, because recreating outdoors for our family is you get to a hotel that doesn't have room service. So I usually park the Jeep someplace. I've not convinced Jen that camping is in our future, but I've not given up the fight.
Oh, well, you got to keep going. But at least you've come across those concrete outhouses.
Yeah.
And in the parks world, they're called A.C.T.S because that's the name of the company that builds them from Spokane, Washington. Well, she went into one of these just to check to see if it had toilet paper. Left her truck running, door open, cell phone on the seat. She went in to check it. The door shut behind her and the handle was broken.
Oh, no.
So she was stuck.
She had her cart. It's a good thing she had her cargo pants and a paper clip and a couple of matches. She MacGyvered her way out, right?
That would make for a better story, perhaps. But the way she actually got out is a neighbor near the park. This ranger always waved to the neighbor every time he was out. And he happened to be out gardening as she drove by. And he realized, she hasn't come back. It's been like an hour and a half. And so he went down just to check, make sure everything was okay. And because she didn't have her cell phone, the radio, she's in a concrete outhouse. So unless somebody's in close enough range, it's not going to work. And he actually came there and saw her truck door open and opened the door for her. So she spent like an hour and a half in there. So it doesn't matter how much Tylenol, Pepto-Bismol you carry, you're stuck in an outhouse, you're stuck.
Well, the thing that comes across for me there, the story, part of the story that resonates, other than wow, that's rough, and it's a good thing that everything worked out, is how important the patterns are that we repeat. So we all repeat these patterns, and sometimes we'll adjust them from time to time. But by repeating these patterns and being consistent in the way that you approach things, you can set a set of expectations for your customers, your prospects, the people you work with. And then when you don't hit on those expectations, they start to wonder, is something wrong? And then depending on the rapport that you've built, they start to think, hey, how can I help? Or maybe I need to check things out. Maybe I need to see if everything is okay. And had that park ranger not waved to that neighbor every day and consistently and built that rapport, things might have ended in a little bit different manner.
It certainly could have. And that's when I tell that story, that's usually what I talk about, how a smile can save your day, because if she didn't do that, if she didn't smile and was friendly to the neighbor, he wouldn't have ever thought about that.
Yep.
So there you go. Well, Mike, I think maybe there might be some people that think, okay, maybe we need to get better at preparing in sales, but we need some help working on it, talking through it. If somebody wants to find out more about preparation in sales, how can they reach you to talk about it?
Well, the best way to contact us is at hello@catalystsale.com. That's just an easy way to get a hold of us if you'd like to send an email. You can go to our website, which is catalystsale.com, and that's SALE.com. And then there's we'll include this in the show notes, but we also have some planning templates that we use. And these planning templates are things like putting together your call plan, putting together your account plan, building out a territory plan. And we'll include some links there. And we'd love to have a conversation with you directly and share our experience around planning and ultimately execution. Because as Mike Tyson said, famously, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth or punched in the face.
Yes.
And Jody, I wonder, how did the Pepto-Bismol park ranger handle the punch in the face routine? Do you have a backstory on that you can share?
No. I mean, I actually went to the academy with her. Is that what you're talking about when we had to get punched in the face?
That is.
Yeah. No, so the backstory on the whole thing is when we're in the academy, because of the very thing Mike said, you think you know how a situation is going to go. You think you know what you will do. But if someone punches you in the face, everything changes. And so part of our training was you had to go in a back room alone with an instructor. I think they did it alone in case we cried, Mike. I think that's what was going on. So you went in a back room alone, and then they just drilled you right in the face because they thought if you ever get punched in the face, we would rather have you already know what it feels like. So I was in the academy with her, and we went through that exercise together, although separately. But I can't say I ever talked to her about it. She was tough, though, so I'm sure she shook it off immediately and got out, I don't know, antiseptic spray or something.
Awesome.
Yes, she was wonderful, and she contributed well to our story today. Well, thank you, Mike. This was a great one, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.